Good afternoon. สวัสดีค่ะ. Welcome to the webinar co-hosted by the Global Compact Network Thailand, United Nations in Thailand, and the Embassy of the United Kingdom to Thailand. My name is Marisa Panyashiwa. I am the Partnership and Development Finance Officer from the Office of the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Thailand. It's my great pleasure to conduct today's webinar entitled Build Forward Better, Turning the Climate Crisis into Business Opportunities. Today's webinar will provide an opportunity to discuss the enabling policy environment needed to incentivize businesses in Thailand to increase ambition and reach net zero emissions by 2050. We are providing simultaneous interpretation for our webinar today, so you can select your preferred language, English or Thai, at the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Before we begin, I would like to share with you an outline for the next hour and a half. We will start with opening remarks by Kun Supachai Jirawanont, Chairperson of the Global Compact Network Thailand and Chief Executive Officer of CP Group, followed by opening remarks by Ms. Nita Sabharwal, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Thailand. And then we will hear from His Excellency Mark Gooding, British Ambassador to Thailand, who will set out the presidency's view on COP26, followed by Mr. Tom Moody, Regional Director for Climate and Energy with the British High Commission in Singapore, on how the United Kingdom works with businesses to create an enabling environment. Participants are welcome to ask questions through the Q&A function. Then Ms. Kasaya Mbaba from the British Embassy will lead us through a brief interactive Zoom poll. We will also hear about updates on Thailand's climate policies and regulations towards the private sector in a presentation by Dr. Pirun Sayasit Panit, Deputy Secretary General and Acting Secretary General of the Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy and Planning. We also have a very interesting panel discussion on the enabling policy frameworks that are needed for businesses and other stakeholders to reach net zero emissions in Thailand by 2050. And we will also hear about some best practices and lessons learned. This panel discussion will be moderated by Kun Virapon Virachotwasin, founder and CEO of Advisory Company Limited. And we'll also hear from Dr. Shaya Jantawasu, Senior Vice President, Sustainability and Corporate Branding, PTT Global Chemical Public Company Limited, Mr. Kirapong Grinchai, Executive Vice President of Engineering of Jalern Pokapan Foods, Dr. Bantoon Sethasirod, Energy Regulatory Commissioner, and Mr. Jens Raczynski, Regional Lead of the UNFCCC's Regional Collaboration Center for Asia and the Pacific. Lastly, we end today's session with closing remarks from the Executive Director of the Global Compact Network Thailand, Kun Thanyapon Krititayawut. Without further ado, may I introduce Mr. Supachai Jirawanont, Chairperson of the Global Compact Network Thailand and Chief Executive Officer of CP Group, to deliver his opening remarks. ขอเรียนเชิญคุณสุประชัยค่ะ
Thank you, Kun Marisa. Kun Kita Sabharwal, the UN Residence Coordinators in Thailand, His Excellency Mr. Mark Gooding, UK Ambassadors to Thailand, Mr. Tom Moody, Regional Director of Climate and Energy, British High Commission, Singapore, Dr. Pirun Sayasit Panit, Acting Secretary General of the Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policies and Planning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and Swadee Krap. On behalf of Global Compact Network Thailand, or GCNT, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to our webinar today. It is aimed to find ways for us together for the private sector, not only to tackle through climate challenges, but also to turn them into business opportunity and sustainability. One of these days, the COVID-19 crisis will subside and may eventually disappear. Yet, there remains an even more serious threat to humanity. That is climate change. We are arriving at the critical moment as the world prepares for the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow. Southeast Asia is one of the world's most vulnerable regions to the impact of climate change. Thailand is no exception. We have not been and will not be able to escape from these severe impacts. As we have seen from the recent release of IPCC's 6th assessment report in early August, the serious climate situation we currently face is what the United Nations Secretary General appropriately calls code red. Ladies and gentlemen, the climate impact are proven by science to be real, with widespread scope and cause effects. We also know in our heart that the way and the speed we are consuming the world is not sustainable. Rising temperatures, severe weather events, rising sea levels, acidification of the world oceans, and many other climate impacts will lead to reduced crop yields, disruption in food systems, flooding of coastal cities worldwide, and possibly make diseases more widespread. At the current trajectory of climate change, the world stands to lose 10% of total economic values by 2050. And as I mentioned, South Asia being the most vulnerable, our region could see a 20% reduction in economic growth if we do nothing to reduce emissions and adapt towards sustainability. We have seen beyond any doubt that human activities have contributed to the global climate crisis. As a result, we cannot delay any longer in making the most serious efforts to avert the crisis. GCNT has been active in not only raising awareness among the private sector and providing resources such as hands-on training, webinars like today, and peers learnings. Our strategy are to promote transparency through disclosures, to apply market mechanisms for encouraging improvement among peers, to offer alternatives and innovation in terms of both technology and mindset, and most importantly, to groom the next generations of leaders. I also urge all GCNT members and business organizations to intensify our efforts. We must speed up decarbonizations using all the available options. Moreover, we must scale up sequestrations through such natural climate solutions as reforestation and soil health management, as well as through advanced carbon capture and storage technologies. This climate crisis is a powerful driver of many innovations, sustainability solutions, which can offer vast business opportunities and reduce costs in the long run. Last year, we saw a 45% growth in renewable energy sector, and renewable power from solar and wind as the only energy source for which demand increased, while consumptions of other fuel declined. At the same time, we must expand other solutions that could mitigate climate change, such as circular economy, focusing on minimizing and recycling waste, and automation, which will strengthen our businesses as well as bring about the new business opportunity to ourselves. Today, we are honored to meet with the representatives from the host country of COP26, the United Kingdom. First, to hear from His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, and then from the British High Commissioner's Regional Director. We will next learn about Thailand's policies from the Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policies and Planning. Latest business leaders and policy makers will join in a panel discussion, which I hope can help shed light on how to turn this climate crisis into opportunities for business and to build our future forward together. Ladies and gentlemen, a large number of you gathering today is highly encouraging. It demonstrates that GCNT members take the severities of the climate changes seriously into account while recognizing our roles and responsibilities as business leaders to take concrete actions. I'm confident that with the expertise, the know-how, and the best practice that our distinguished speakers will offer, GCNT members will be inspired to take more actions, to make more ambitious goals and commitments, and to put in even more efforts than before towards helping our one and only planet. We sincerely appreciate you being here with us and hope to bring the dialogue today forward to our annual GCNT Forum on the 11th October. I end by thanking all of the speakers and the teams involved in the organizing this event, the British Embassy, the United Nations, and the UNFCCC, ONEP, the Energy Regulatory Commission, PTT, and CPF. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful session.
ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you very much คุณสุประชัย I would now like to invite Ms. Vita Sabrawal, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Thailand, to deliver her opening remarks. Kun Vita, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marisa. Kun Supachai Chiravanon, Chairperson GCNT and CEO CP Group, Ambassador Mark Gooding, United Kingdom, Dr. Pirun, Acting Secretary General, Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy and Planning. On behalf of the United Nations, let me extend a very warm welcome to you all. I'm delighted to be joining the Global Compact Network Thailand, along with the UK Embassy, to co-host this webinar on turning the climate crisis into business opportunities, given the fast approaching COP26, which is just over a month from now in Glasgow. The science is clear. The climate crisis is advancing at an alarming rate, and it will affect all of us. Government needs to set ambitious climate targets, but it is also critical that all sectors, including the business community, do their part to achieve net zero emissions. In our last webinar, we discussed the race to zero, science-based targets, and what it takes for a business to be a net zero emitter. In today's session, we move the conversation forward to understand the perspective of the COP26 presidency, as well as the policy framework needed to increase ambition, drive transformation, and incentivize new industries in support of a decarbonized Thailand. Both webinars, as Kun Supachai just said, helped pave the way towards the GCNT forum on 11th October, where the private sector has the opportunity to lead Thailand's efforts by committing to ambitious reductions in CO2 emissions. As you know, prior to the pandemic, economic growth and carbon emissions have traditionally grown proportionally, leading to a possible 2.7-degree rise in temperatures, which the UN Secretary General has called catastrophic pathway. At the heart of that message is that it is not too late to chart a smarter and a more sustainable course. In the continuing recovery amid the pandemic, knock-on emission reductions are now returning to nearly normal levels as economic activity picks up globally and across the region. The key difference this time around will be the kind of investments that we collectively make to shape the recovery. Adopting pathways that are low carbon dependent through technology, efficiency, and innovation will determine whether we meet the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement. A recent UN report made clear that a cut in emissions by about 45% by 2030 could help us achieve the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement. However, the current climate commitments by countries across the globe, including Thailand, suggest that the planet is on a pathway to see an actual increase in emissions of 16% by 2030. This means that each of us needs to set much more ambitious targets for mitigation, backed up with credible action to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. I believe that this is an opportunity to shape the recovery and demonstrate to the region and beyond the role that private sector can play to move towards carbon neutrality in Thailand. The UN in Thailand is also engaged in dialogue with investors and bankers to scale up financing in support of sustainability. Just yesterday, 43 investors and bankers in the presence of the finance minister committed to conduct business responsibly that will help Thailand drive towards sustainability and advance the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. This should translate into increasing investments into businesses like yours to drive the process of transformation. Just as we engage with you, we will also be working with experts and advocates who are leading on biodiversity to protect the 468 species and the habitats that are currently threatened with extinction in Thailand. The UN brings international expertise and networks to the table, which rely on the private sector and other stakeholders to work hand in hand for sustainable, resilient, and carbon neutral growth, bringing prosperity while also protecting this beautiful planet. Let me end by saying, let's own this ambition. The time is now to take action in a journey in which we can both learn and inspire each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Kundita. I would now like to introduce His Excellency Mark Gooding, British Ambassador to Thailand, to talk about the presidency's view on COP26 and the important role of the private sector in the low carbon transition.
สวัสดีครับ ผมชื่อมาร์ค กูดิง ผมเป็นเอกอัครราชทูตอังกฤษประจำประเทศไทย First and foremost today, I would like to extend my thanks to Kun Supachai, Chairperson of GCNT, and also to the UN Resident Coordinator, Geeta Sabharwal, for their efforts to organise the event today. The UK is proud to be hosting the United Nations Climate Conference, or COP26, in November this year, where the world will meet to agree on more ambitious action to address climate change. We are working with every nation to reach agreement on climate action and achieve 4 key goals at COP26. First, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Second, to enable communities and natural habitats to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Third, to mobilize climate finance to help countries take action. And fourth, to work together to deliver climate action. These goals are crucial to Thailand as a country that is highly vulnerable to climate. and Thailand is crucial to the goals as a top 20 emitter and influential regional power. And it is not only up to governments to deliver on these goals. COP26 must be the moment that every country and every part of society embraces their responsibility to protect our planet. The science is clear. We must cut global greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and reach net zero by mid-century to reach our goal of keeping temperature rises to within 2 degrees or ideally 1.5 degrees. We also need to adapt to our changing climate. COVID-19 has been a powerful reminder of the world's vulnerability to systemic risks. The recovery from COVID should look to increase our resilience to the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, and sectors exposed to transitional risks. And we must work together to achieve this. Private sector business is absolutely essential. We need the innovation, influence, and energy of the private sector on our side. Ahead of COP26, we are calling on all businesses to join the Race to Zero, a UN-backed global campaign rallying non-state actors to take rigorous and immediate action to reduce emissions. Setting ambitious and credible net zero commitments sends the strongest signal to markets, supply chains, governments, and consumers that businesses are committed to the transition. The Race to Zero requires businesses to take robust, short-term action to contribute to halving global emissions by 2030, and to achieve net zero emissions as soon as possible, and by 2050 at the very latest. Our thanks to the GCNT for hosting an excellent workshop on the Race to Zero last month. If you are thinking about joining via the Science Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, please do that this month. At COP26, the SBTI and campaign partners will celebrate companies that are committed to 1.5 degrees centigrade climate action and showcase net zero commitments and targets. The deadline to sign up to be recognised at COP is the 30th of September. Businesses are truly a vital component of all our goals for COP26 and can help achieve success through your own action, working with peers and across your value chains, and becoming positive advocates for climate action. Key to this is working with governments to let them know that businesses want stronger climate policy and green and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. In the UK, the Confederation of British Industry, or CBI, lobbied the government extensively to legislate a target to reach net zero by 2050, arguing that climate leadership would drive UK competitiveness and secure long-term prosperity. Indeed, in 2019, the UK government amended the Climate Change Act to commit the UK to achieving net zero by 2050. This means that all aspects of our economy will need to be carbon neutral by 2050. The UK is also committed to cutting carbon emissions by 78% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels. Companies are stepping up to the challenge. Over 1,000 UK companies have signed up to the Race to Zero so far. Of course, it doesn't stop at a net zero target, and the UK government continuously works with business to implement the policies needed for the transition to a green economy. The UK's policies will also have an impact on the UK's supply chain markets, such as Thailand. Businesses should act now to ensure they are part of the global low-carbon transition, which is accelerating. Countries and organisations aiming for net zero cover nearly 70% of GDP. The producer countries and businesses who respond to our and other countries' legislation quickly will reap the rewards, while those who lag behind might lose crucial market access. The latest IPCC report shows that 1.5 degrees is still achievable, but it is retreating, and it is retreating fast. I echo the UN Secretary General calling the report a code red for humanity. We need to follow the science, take action this year, and make sure at COP26 that we are able credibly to say that we have kept 1.5 degrees alive. Remember, to be showcased at COP26, please submit your commitment letter to SBTI by the 30th of September. The British Embassy Bangkok will be proud to see Thai companies highlighted at COP26. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I would now like to introduce you to Mr. Tom Moody, who is the Regional Director for Climate and Energy with the British High Commission in Singapore. He will share some of the United Kingdom's policies that help create an enabling environment for businesses' climate action. Participants are welcome to ask questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. Mr. Tom Moody, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kun Marissa. I'm afraid my video, I'm trying to turn it on, but it doesn't seem to work. Is it controlled centrally?
We'll have our technical people checked very quickly.
Thank you. I'll begin anyway while you figure that out. So Chairman Kun Supachai, Resident Coordinator Sabawal, Acting Secretary General of ONEP, distinguished speakers and audience members, thank you for having me here today. As Ambassador Gooding said, the role of business is vital to helping the world to both respond to and seize the immense opportunities of the transition to a green global economy. We've heard about the urgency of this task as leaders look ahead to COP26 in 5 weeks. All around the world, we see businesses moving ahead, making plans for net zero and not waiting for governments. That's why over 2,000 companies around the world have made that commitment already by signing up to the race to zero, including one-third of the UK's largest, the FTSE 100 listed firms. In the financial sector alone globally, over US $70 trillion of assets are now committed to holding only those investments which are aligned with net zero by 2050. And the stock value of firms like Tesla and NextEra have vastly outgrown their brown equivalents, Toyota and ExxonMobil. So businesses are already seeing and seizing the opportunities in the transition. So why is that? Well, because the path to aligning to 1.5 degree future is already crystal clear. The question for the private sector is not whether or not to make that change, but rather to do so smoothly, capturing the opportunities it presents, or to do so in an unplanned fashion, resulting in loss of market share and higher costs. So what are the opportunities which are galvanizing that action? Well, our COP26 high-level champion for private sector, Nigel Topping, says that wise corporations have now started to see the green transition in the same way as their forebears saw the transistor or the internal combustion engine, an S-curve of growth in which the early adopters see exponential and unstoppable growth and cannot be caught by those who wait behind. And the economic analysis supports that conclusion. It supports the conclusion that the inevitable fulfillment over time of the legally binding Paris Agreement makes economic sense. It will create significantly more jobs and growth by investing in clean, valuing and preserving nature and adapting to the worst impacts of climate proactively rather than the opposite. So our role in the public sector is to recognise both the motivation of the private sector to do this anyway and establish their growing businesses in jurisdictions which most support that growth. And we need to encourage and enable its ability to flourish by creating a clear and predictable business environment. So let me talk a little bit about how the UK is doing that. Our experience is that the UK since 1990 has expanded our GDP by 75% while cutting our emissions by 43%. Our low carbon industries already support over 460,000 jobs, e.g. electric vehicle manufacturing and offshore wind. In 2020, recognising the points I've made about encouraging that business growth, our Prime Minister set out a 10-point plan to lay the foundations for a green industrial revolution. It will mobilise about US $16.5 billion of government investment to attract over 3 times as much private sector investment by the end of this decade. And we estimate it will create and support up to 250,000 highly skilled green jobs in the UK.
Sorry to interrupt. I think there's a little issue with the audio. Could you please adjust your microphone just a little bit? And you can try turning on your video again. Sorry for the interruption. Thank you.
No, that's okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, the audio is much better now. And you can try turning on your camera.
Yeah, sorry, it says it's controlled centrally.
Okay, I think the audio is much better now, and I think it's okay to proceed.
And my apologies. Let me continue. We'll move on. So our 10-point plan will invest in a whole of economy shift to securing the opportunities across several areas, including offshore wind, advanced new technologies such as energy storage and power like hydrogen and small modular nuclear. The benefits of this will be twofold, we think. So first, solar and wind is now cheaper for consumers and businesses than fossil fuels, much as it is in 2/3 of the global population. So we have encouraged private investment to support rapid growth in renewables through policy-driven tariffs. There's good evidence for that in this region too, where the World Bank analysis has shown that feed-in tariffs for solar and wind have supported billions of US dollars worth of foreign direct investment into Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. But it also positions our own industries to grow fast enough to compete overseas. And it won't surprise you that this is similar from all of the major economies, recognizing the prospects for a new industrial revolution taking shape. The plan also greens our entire transport system, from electric vehicles to shipping and aviation. It includes the ending of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030, and investing heavily in charging infrastructure and development of supporting technologies such as batteries and recycling. I commend the government of Thailand for its 30 by 30 plan to boost production and use of EVs there in Thailand. And I'm delighted that the UK is working with the Ministry of Energy to share our experiences and plans. In the region as a whole, ASEAN expects there to be 7% year-on-year increase in zero electric vehicle emission vehicle sales, reaching at least 20% by 2025. The 10-point plan also positions our City of London to continue its status as the world's largest green finance and technology hub, including for new developments such as carbon trading. And it was recently awarded a leading role in the new global governance for voluntary carbon markets. We've also made mandatory disclosure of the climate impact of all financial transactions by 2025. And we're issuing our first sovereign green bond this year. I'm very pleased that the Thai Securities and Exchange Commission has declared its own support for TCFD. And we've been able to work with them to introduce disclosure to Thai listed companies already. And the G7 have already committed to the same mandatory climate-related disclosure. So this plan is the UK's vision for the recovery from COVID. And it's a vision that is fundamentally green. It's about generating jobs, bolstering the economy, while continuing to drive down emissions now and in the future. We have that vision and plan because we believe it's not only the right thing to do in our COP26 presidency, but it also makes sound economic sense, and it will support businesses in generating the most jobs and growth from any future planning scenario. So it gives business certainty of our policy intentions. So let me end by saying this. As the first major economy to adopt a legally binding net zero target for 2050, the UK is both convinced of the need for transition and seen how beneficial it can be for business. Our approach to reaching net zero by 2050 has been taken with detailed consultation with businesses across the economy in all sectors. And we do that because of the fundamental role that they can and must play in the transition. So we stand ready to share our experience and skills with Thai policymakers and businesses across the economy. As members of the UN Global Compact, you're already doing very much to help achieve the SDGs and support climate action. So I encourage and commend the UNFCCC Race to Zero to you, and I hope you will take this small step to recognise that work on the most important public stage of our time COP26 in 33 days in Glasgow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moody, and thank you for sharing the UK's experience. Now we would like to do a short interactive Zoom poll. And I'd like to invite Ms. Kesaya Mbaba, COP26 Climate Attaché from the British Embassy, to lead us through the poll. Kesaya, you have the floor.
Sawadee ka, everybody, and wonderful to see so many of you here today. I'm really pleased to be representing the British Embassy, and we just thought we'd give you a brief break, but not really a break, because we want to learn some more about you. So we would like to know, first up, what sector do you represent? And we're going to have a Zoom poll here, so you should be seeing that pop up very soon, which is going to ask you where you are. So, oh, I see I can't vote, which is a bit of a shame, but that's fine. Please show us, which sector do you represent? Wonderful. Okay, I hope we're getting in some good polling here. We may move on to the next question now, which is asking you, does your organization have a net zero target? So you have some choices here. You can say, yes, our organization does have a net zero target. No, our organization doesn't have a net zero target. Or we'd like to know if you plan to have one. So you don't have a net zero target in place yet, but you're kind of seeing that a number of other organizations do. Many countries around the world are putting in net zero targets, including by 2050, which is the main target. And you might be thinking of putting one in place. So please do answer this question here. Does your organization have a net zero target? Okay, that's a short one, so we'll move on to the next question, which we hope will give us some very enlightening insight. What enabling policies do you think would be needed for you, your business or company, to increase your climate ambition? So we know that it's really important to have the right policies in place for businesses and other organizations to really be able to take action on climate change. There's a lot that you can do within your own organizations, but that policy environment is also really important. And we'd really like to understand more about what you'd like to see here. So there's a few different options there. We've got some renewable energy, and that could be either related to renewable energy that you produce or would like to produce, or renewable energy through the grid. Also waste management, water and other natural resources management, perhaps something to do with sustainable supply chains. Or would you like more policies related to finance, so climate-related financial disclosures, green taxonomy? Or are you more interested in policies that will support carbon capture and storage, carbon trading or payment for ecosystem storage? And then, of course, there's adaptation to climate change and policies that support low-carbon transport, for example, electric vehicles, or being able to transport freight by different low-carbon methods. If your preferred policy isn't here, please do pop it into the chat, because we would really like to hear from you what you would like to see here. So we are going to have a look at those answers, and I thank everybody who put in those, your answers there, and we'll have a look at those results and come back to you on those later. So thank you very much, and back to you, Kun Marisa.
Thank you, Kuntesaya. Look forward to seeing what the results are. Next, we have a presentation on Thailand's climate policies and regulations towards the private sector. Allow me to introduce you to Dr. Pirun Sayasit Panit, Deputy Secretary General and Acting Secretary General of the Office of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy and Planning, who will be presenting in Thai. Dr. Pirun, the floor is yours. ขอเรียนเชิญ Dr. Pirun ค่ะ
ครับ สวัสดีครับ ก็ขออนุญาตถอดหน้ากากนะครับ ก็สวัสดีผู้เข้าร่วมประชุมทุกท่านนะครับ Good afternoon to everyone. ผมเข้าใจ
So
ว่า
good afternoon, everyone. I think there's an interpretation today. So today I am very honored to be invited by the GCNT to talk about the policies and regulations that relevant to the climate change. I have about 15 minutes, so I'm gonna go through my presentation quite quickly. So today I'm going to talk about the climate change and the role of the government and what have we been doing as a country and the mechanism that's going to be released today, which is actually this year, which is actually the Climate Change Act, and what have we been doing towards the net zero emission and also the private sector engagement. So for the past 10 years, when I joined as a director of overseeing climate change, net zero was actually not a very important mandate for any country, and not as it is important as today. And we are now moving towards the COP26. Our minister from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment will join. And as you can see that it has been estimated that the temperature will rise 1.02 Celsius up in 2020. And we have broken the height in just June. And you can see that glacial melting that has been exacerbated. So with the special report at 1.5 that has been released by IPCC, we find that even if the temperature rises 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, we're going to have more risk as ever. There'll be floods and also a problem with water availability. And we could probably face 350 million people that could be facing a water availability. And also that's going to really affect the biodiversity, plants and animal from 6, 8 or 4%, as you can see on the screen. So considering the climate risk index, we are actually ranking 9 globally as countries most affected by extreme weather events. So why we are actually high up there? Because we are facing with flood or drought and with a high economic value that is being disrupted, and particularly in the flood in 2011, that's main event, and all the floods that we've been having annually. So everything will be calculated into that climate risk index. So the greenhouse gas emission, we rank about 20 in the world. And the numbers that has been sent from 2000 to 2016, we have had the increase of greenhouse gas emission over those years. So that's reflecting on the economic growth and there has been an high absorption as well in forest sector. So 354 million tons, you can see the segregation by sectors. 28 million tons that's being absorbed. So this is actually what we need to do and to address the net greenhouse gas emission of Thailand. So if you look at the roles of the government and our policies, so I'm sorry, but the interpretation is a bit fuzzy because we are hearing a lot of background noise from the source language, but I'm going to do my best. If you look at the climate change policy and action, we are actually going to rank 1 now and 40 in ASEAN and 42 in the world. In Thailand, we have the 20-year national strategic plan, and we have the national adaptation plan, and we have already established a lot of flagship projects according to the NDC roadmap. We also have the RAC Nama project, and also using hydraulic cement, working with the concrete association in order to generate a more environmental friendly cement. And also rice farming in Thailand. If we achieve this project, we'll be able to address the methane emission. And also the Monterey is also behind the Green Hotel project. So we actually have clear policy and action here. What about the goals of the greenhouse gas emission? So in 2020, this is actually a voluntary target. We want to reduce 7 to 8% in energy and transportation sector. And another goal that's in 2030, we want to achieve a greenhouse gas reduction from 20 to 25%. And we would focus on the industrial sector, waste, and transportation. And we are planning, the long-term strategy, or the LTS, which is actually part of the Paris Agreement. And we're going to send all the results to the UNFCCC, and before COP23, we're going to submit our numbers. So let's look at what we have achieved in our first phase. So we have reduced already 64.2 million tons. So we wanted to achieve 7%. So we are actually doing very well, and it serves as a great foundation to achieve the goal in 2030. And in 2021, we're going to now contribute to the NDC. So the main mechanism, which is actually in the process of submitting to the cabinet now, which is the Climate Change Act, or actually it's a draft right now, because we want to ramp up what we can do at the policy level. So we have the committee who is overseeing all of this, and it will be implemented to relevant agencies, and also the criteria in disclosing all these GSG emission. And so we have also set up the environmental fund to support the private sector and the public in order to enhance the climate actions nationally. So for net zero emission, we are also ramping up our efforts as well. So we have some preliminary results here, and because we are clear now that we want to achieve peak emission in 2030, that's not over 370 million tons. And we have actually taken the pathway of 2 Celsius. If we go by the plan that we've laid out, it's going to, in accordance with the 2 degrees pathways. And we will achieve the net zero carbon in 2065. So we work closely with the Ministry of Energy and set up the priorities, and that we want to achieve carbon neutrality. And we want to look at the energy use That's really going to generate renewable energy up to 50%. And we want to also shift the priority to electric vehicle to 69% in 2035. And all of this, we would be able to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2065. So this is an image where you can see that if you look at the issue of carbon neutrality, and if you can see the change and the proportion of power production. On the left, if you can see the green part, that's the power coming from natural gas. And in green, it's from coal and lignite. So from 20 to 2050, we're not going to have a lot of lignite anymore. And most of the energy will be renewable energy from solar, from biomass, and also natural gas. That's 35%. There has to be an installation of carbon capture and energy storage. And right now it's quite expensive, but we will incorporate technology and innovation in order to achieve the goal that we've set out. So the greenhouse gas emission is important, but we cannot ignore the absorption as well. So the Monray, the minister, and has actually consulted other agencies. So we wanted to ramp up the forestation, and we want to increase 11 million rise of natural forests and green areas in the cities. And I think it's great that we want to invite the private sector to come in and work with us as well, so we can achieve the carbon neutrality by 2065. So let's look at the challenge of climate change. That's the global megatrend right now. So what are the challenges that we see? So we can see those indirect trade barriers. That's inevitable because there are carbon border adjustment mechanism, or CBAM. We are keeping our eyes out for this because there has been Fit for 55 package release, and that changes the total phase of the energy and transportation for the greenhouse gas emission efforts within 2030. So this particular mechanism could have impact on the export sector of Thailand. So there's actually 5 products, but what would be an impact to Thailand is actually an export of steel. That's about 4.7 billion baht worth. So we have to get ready about this in disclosing this carbon emission. ICAO as well, they have adjusted their standards in greenhouse gas emission, and also policies from the multinational company, because they want their business in the whole value chain to be green. So if we do not have the registry or the proper disclosure, it may impact investment in the future. So this is going to shape how we deal with this in the future. And in the future, investment will be dependent on the greenhouse gas emission. And you're going to have to interpret all these targets into your business strategies as well to reflect on the actions that you will take. Manufacturing is important as well. Innovation and technologies that can be used to introduce CO2, methane. Methane in rice in the sector is going to have a great impact on Thailand. But we need to keep going, and in order to have technology and measures to curb the methane, and at the same time sustaining the quality of life of those rice farmers. So it's important for us to synergize with the public, with the educational sector to create this awareness. So what are we doing? So ONEP, we consulted with Board of Investment, and they have just released measures. And we talked about the greenhouse gas emission in industry. So we wanted to work on these carbon capture and storage and utilization. So these refrigeration and petrochemicals plays an important part. So BOI has just released this year in September. And in the future, BOI is going to expand these measures in methane release in agricultural sector. So this is going to really affect the landscape of the industries for us to have sustainable efforts in greenhouse gas emission. So how can we achieve our goals? So the department, the Royal Forest Department, there has been a sharing of carbon credit for the private sector. So that's going to be 90 and 10 or whatever according to the agreement. Another mechanism that's we are working on the action plan right now. We're going to see the collaboration from the private sector for forestation, because it serves as a great place for us to be able to achieve the carbon neutrality. So that's in an overarching view of Thailand. Right now, I'm going to just spend this time and for you to see the policy in Thailand, as well as mechanism that we are working on now for us to engage and leverage with the private sector to work with the government to achieve the goals that we've set for Thailand.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pirun. Next, we have a very interesting panel discussion on turning the climate crisis into business opportunities. I'd now like to hand the floor over to Khun Weerapon Weerachodwasin, founder and CEO of Advisory Company Limited, who will be moderating the panel discussion and introducing our panel members. ขอเรียนเชิญคุณวีรพลค่ะ
ครับขอบคุณมากนะครับสวัสดีแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะครับ Good afternoon everyone ผมวีรพล วีรโชติวสินนะครับ Founder and CEO บริษัท Advisory จำกัดนะครับก็เป็นสมาชิกของ Global Compact Network Thailand นะครับก็ยินดีที่มาเป็น Moderator.
I'm the founder of Advisory Thailand and one of the member of the Global Compact Network Thailand. And we have heard from many of them, especially from insight from Dr. Pirun. We have now seen that according to the current situation, many people and also the environment are affected. So let's discuss how can we, the private sector, going forward this climate change crisis. And we are honored by many distinguished guests. There are 4 of them. Let me start introduction one by one. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself a little and mention the challenges or the focuses of your company on the issue of climate change. Let me start with Dr. Shaya Jantawatsu, Senior Vice President, Sustainability and Corporate Branding, PTT Global Chemical Public Company Limited. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Mr. Weerapon, should I be in Thai or English? I'm not sure. It's up to you, sir. We have the interpretation function, but if you are more familiar, it's so thank you very much, GCNT, for inviting PTTGC here today in the panel discussion. Now, when we think about climate change, we think of it as a global issue, and there's no one single company or organization who can solve this problem solo. We would need cooperation from every sectors, and PTTGC, we came from private sectors, and we see this particular crisis not only as a risk, but also a business opportunity. And we have been evaluating all those kind of risks and trying to identify the business opportunity in the next 30 years. First of all, PTTGC we are a listed company, and we think this is very important when we are looking at the future. How can we contribute to this? We can play some small roles in this greenhouse gas emission reduction. So we have committed that by the year 2050, we would reduce the emission to net zero. The difficulty is how can we achieve that goal? We have been going into the details, and we do have planned to increase the efficiency of our business, especially on the manufacturing side. And we are a petrochemical business. We emitted a certain level of greenhouse gas as we are in the energy sector. What we see is that in the future, we can transform us into a low carbon business, but it's going to take some time, of course. However, if we look at the roadmap, we can apply new technology to increase the efficiencies and to modernize all the manufacturing assets that could contribute to a certain part of GHG reduction. And the second part, which is a big part, is the transition to low carbon business. We are going to invest more in a low carbon business. For example, what we have already initiated in the past year, we are looking at what we call a higher value business, which would mean a business that has a low greenhouse gas emissions, but high growth, and produce products that's going to support the sustainability trend in the future. And thirdly, it would be rather difficult for us to reduce the greenhouse gas emission to zero by ourselves. So we are looking at compensation assets. How can we bring in new technology? I think it's roughly the same with everyone. We are looking at carbon capturing and carbon storage. We truly believe that Thailand has many potential because the major emission cluster is in the eastern part and the central part of the country, which mean the hotspots are close to each other. Secondly, the carbon storage would need an area, a space to store those gas. In Thailand, we are quite lucky. We have a concessions in Thai Gulf, Gulf of Thailand, which is not far away from the hotspot. Now, the question is, how can we develop this infrastructure and how can we collect this greenhouse gas and feed into the infrastructure that would trap the carbon? We are also very exciting to see COP26 coming very soon in about a month or so. As a private sector, we do expect to see the dialogue on the stage at the international level. How can every party, including the business sector, doing things? I mean, going back to Paris Agreement, what have already been done? What are the existing gaps? And what are the goals that we were not able to quite achieve it yet? I mean, if we discuss it openly, we must admit that there are quite a big gaps in order to reach the target. And secondly, effort of each party at the government or private sectors level, how can we collaborate and build certain kind of mechanism that would allow every country to contribute to this particular goal? For example, climate finance. This is a big issue. How can the developing countries be supported? And most importantly, knowledge sharing and also technology transfer that could allow us to transition into a low carbon society. So I think that collaboration between sectors is very important in order to achieve the COP21 targets. And for COP26, I expect to see mechanisms and collaboration, especially commitments. There must be more commitments comparing to previously in order to catch up with the target. That's all from me now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Shaya. We saw focus on global partnership. We saw the use of digital technology as a tool to drive forward the climate issue. And most importantly, we expect that the COP26 dialogue would be developing. And sorry, we have such a limited time. So without further ado, let me invite our next on the panelist, Mr. Pirapong Grinchai, Executive Vice President of Corporate Engineering, Taran Pokapan Foods Public Company Limited. So what is your current focus, please? Thank you very much, Kun Virapon, and good afternoon to all the participants. For CPEF, we have a vision to be a sustainable kitchen of the world, and it is quite a clear vision. CPF is leaders in the agricultural and food business. Our target is to achieve sustainable growth with care along the supply chains to protect the natural resources and to make sure that there's not much carbon dioxide emissions. As the leader in the food business, our target is to protect the food security. This is our mission. This is the main mission of CPF. CPF has every intention to reduce the carbon emission. We have our internal policy, the sustainability in action, and we followed the CP Group policy, which is to achieve the carbon neutral by the year 2030. This is the commitment from our executive committee. Now, in order to work with every business and every country around the world in order to make sure that the temperature is not right above 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are going to be true partners. We are going to work together because there is only one single planet for us, and we need to make it a better place. I think this is a very good opportunity that all the leading companies show their visions and missions to move forward together. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kun Pirapong. And as the leaders in the food business, the kitchen of the world, you pay a lot of attention to the supply chains and to food security and have set target that you shall achieve the net zero by the year 2030. Thank you. And let's move on to the side of the regulator. I would like to invite Dr. Bantu Sethasirot, the Energy Regulatory Commissioner. Thank you. Good afternoon, Kun Virapon, and the participants in today's sessions, and my thanks to the GCNT for inviting me here into a very, very important event. As there is a very limited time, let me focus on enabling policy frameworks for net zero emissions. I'm going to start by the concept of policy frameworks for the climate change in order to achieve the net zero emission. Then I shall move on to the movement in climate change in 3 levels. And lastly, I will focus especially on the energy sector, which would involve the policy framework that shall lead to net zero emission. So we are going to start at the policy framework concept from the present to the future. So first of all, today, climate change is no longer just an environmental issue. This is different from the previous 2 decades, where climate change is only environmental issues. But now, climate change is not only on the agenda for the environmental department or for the Ministry of Natural Resources, but it's an issue that must be integrated into every sector. It must be embedded into the policies of every sector. Now, in order to embed the climate change into the policy concept of every sector, this is already an indicator under SDG 7. So current policy frameworks need to see climate change as a comprehensive issue, as a sustainable development issue. Secondly, on the policy framework concept would be that we need to change the mindset that the GSG mitigation is against economic development. We are now shifting the perception. Now we see that climate change mitigation supporting economic growth, it would lead to more income, to green jobs, to GDP growth, to green economy in every sector. Because, as I mentioned earlier, climate change is an all-encompassing issue. So now we don't have to decoupling between the climate change and economic growth. We're starting to see these idea in many countries, especially with the EU Green Deal. So this is the first part, which is the concept framework. Then we'll move on to the next step. In the next slide, please. We should describe the policy and political landscape movement. And this is the change in the political landscape, especially in the year 2021. So at first, we start at the global level. SDG was launched in the year 2015. Then we have the Paris Agreement, and then there was a mild hiccup, which the train seems to be stagnant. But the change in US presidency, when we have Mr. Joe Biden, and in the leader summit on climate, 2021 April, lead to huge new change. Many countries has set up their net zero target, which mostly at 2050. Many countries increased their NDC. EU increased by 40%, Japan increased by 26%. There are many conflicts in the world, but on the climate change, we are converging into the same target. This is a shared issues of the world. The European Green Deal, that is very important, that shall lead to effective transition. So this is the movement at global level. At the national level, we have heard from Dr. Pirun already, so I'm not going to go into the details, but we do have the climate change master plan, and now we have the BCG model, which is the national agenda, and that shall drive the economic under the concept of BCG. There will be the drafting of climate law and so on. Lastly, is at the subnational and private sector level. So the idea, the framework on ESG, on the environmental social governance, it has been moving forward. It became a part of the stock exchange authority laws, and there's an impact in the country already. We have the RE 100. Many investors asking for RE 100 within 24 hours. And also at the city level, there is the Race to Zero campaign. There is 733 cities around the world and 3,076 business and at least 100 major business. And this is the change that happened really fast this year. The policy landscape has completely changed, and that affects the policy framework immensely. Thirdly, I shall focus on energy policy frameworks, as this is the core for Thailand. So we focus very much on the GHG emission. 70% of carbon emission came from energy and transport sector. So if we can change this, we can answer to the target. The next very important milestone, which has been mentioned by Dr. Pirun, is the National Energy Plan framework. It's still a framework, but we do have some draft ready. We have some public hearing, and this is going to be a very important milestone, we have just been approved by the National Energy Committee on the 4th of August this year. I'm not going to go into the details, but I want to show you the whole framework and the enabling factors. We have the 4D 1E concept. So what are the 4Ds? Can you move to the next? Can you move back to the previous slide?
อีก1 สไลด์ครับขอบคุณครับถอยหลังนะครับถอยหลัง 4D นะครับมี decentralized นะครับกระจาย
The 4D include decentralization
เดินหน้าครับเดินหน้า2 สไลด์ครับขออภัยครับ decentralization นะครับ decarbonize
Second is decarbonization. Then we have digitalization, deregulation, and the 1E is electrification. This is the concept that we have set up. A target is to have at least 50% of energy from the renewable energy sector, and the EV target is 30% by the year 2030, and to increase the energy efficiency by at least 30% to achieve the net zero carbon by the year 2065. And there's going to be energy transition to clean energy. The National Energy Plan would support all the 3 dimensions. It would answer to the environmental goals, to the economic goals, to the energy goals as well. Next slide, please. This is a more detailed of the National Energy Plan frameworks. We are still in the public meeting recommendation at the moment. It will be in place by next year, the year 2022. So if anyone want to comment or submit your recommendation, you are welcome. Next slide, please. So everything I have mentioned is a result of my analysis of the current trend. I think that we are in the middle of a big climate change. The climate convergence model is the convergence between energy transition, the 41E, which is SDG 7, with the race to zero, which answer to SDG 13 on climate action. This is the convergence of energy and climate action to achieve the 3 E's: environment, economic, and energy. And this is my last slide. I think it is clear now that there is a change in the policy framework. So what are the components of these new ecosystems? In the past, the energy regulation was designed in the age of fossil energy, but now we are facing climate change, we are facing disruptive technologies. We have to apply the regulation innovation. So this is the first one, AR. So we are not only deregulation, we also have to re-regulation. We have to rewrite the regulation to support the change, the sellings of energy between business and business. The sandbox is already available in many places. We must have the regulation for distributed power regeneration, which can be on the rooftop or the community energy generators. We have at 149 megawatt already all around the countries. We have to support third-party access, billing check. This is just some examples on regulatory innovation. And secondly, is the economic measures. Carbon price is very important. Carbon market will support that. Carbon price is the key to drive the economy, but it must be carbon price that generates income, not just to cover the cost as we have seen in the past. This is how the carbon emission reduction can generate incomes and economic growth. Next is the science and technology innovation, the energy storage systems, a new type of batteries that are going to be cheaper and going to be widely available at the household level. And there's a hybrid vehicle, electrical vehicles, and can we generate from the vehicle back to the grid, the V2G, which is going to be available very soon. And forecasting of the RE at a better accuracy. And lastly, infrastructure, smart grid, grid modernization, microgrid. These are all infrastructure we need. This is going to be an investment for green energy and green job. EV charging stations, they have to be enough to support all the EVs, the community power plants, and enhancing single buyers. This is one of the topics that has been covered by the national framework. And these are all the enabling policy frameworks to answer to the issue of the climate change. And I truly believe that all the GCNT, the private sector, you do see business opportunities, job creating opportunities, and also to achieve the net zero emission. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Pantun. This is very interesting. And you mentioned paradigm shift on and how can greenhouse gas be achieved together with economic growth.
The regional lead of the UNFCCC. So please address the forecast of the climate issue right now. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Khun Veerapan, for introduction and giving me the floor. I'm cautious that we have quite little time left, so I'd really try to more or less summarize my slide very briefly. Luckily, some of what I was planning to talk about has already been mentioned by my colleagues and previous speakers. So just very briefly, I'm the regional lead of the Regional Collaboration Center of UNFCCC and IGS in Asia and Pacific. It's one of 6 regional collaboration centers established by the UNFCCC. You could call us the RCC Bangkok. We have a strong background in the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism of the Kyoto Protocol, but now also, of course, working under supporting countries under the Paris Agreement, especially on NDCs, but also in general on carbon pricing issues and climate finance. So Gita, the UN Residence Coordinator, had already mentioned the NDC synthesis report. It's very obvious that the NDCs are not on track, or the summary of NDCs is not on track to reach the 1.5 temperature target. There is certainly a progress. The resubmitted and newly submitted NDCs clearly show that there is a decrease in emissions planned, but there's also still a large number of NDCs missing. We still hope that some countries will come forward before COP so that we actually bend the temperature target. We are currently on a 2.5 warming trajectory, and we certainly have a long way to go to reach the 1.5. Then also I wanted to mention the Race to Zero initiative, which also Ambassador Godin has mentioned already. So I'm very pleased also to share an update here. The numbers on the, so I will not go into the details of the campaign. I think also if you had followed our last webinar, you may know a little bit about the campaign. The numbers on the slides, I haven't updated the numbers on the slides, though I did look them up this morning, and I'm very pleased to see that this campaign, it's the non-state actor campaign in parallel to Ambition by countries, really picks up some speed. We have more than 440 companies already signed up to the initiative, and the numbers of cities, you still see the 733 on the slide, has climbed up to 799. So also the other numbers are really steadily increasing. So quite some good progress on the non-state actors, and also to increase participation of private sector. Then lastly, the question about policy, enabling policies. We also believe that the introduction of a carbon price is really one of the key policy recommendation. It would really set a target or set a price signal to private sector, which can really increase also private sector climate action. This needs to go hand in hand also with low emission targets or zero emission targets by mid-century. Again, that's very important long-term signal. We do have the NDC process for a number of short-term targets, but really we see this over the past year, a number of net zero target announcement and the submission from the low emission development strategies really helps to set the tone also for private sector to come on board. So I'll leave it here and like to give back to you and very happy to answer questions. And yeah, I mean, just lastly, we don't have to mention again, COP26 will be very important and very critical. It was delayed for a year, but now we really have to close the negotiation, the remaining issues, and also really hope that more NDCs and targets will be submitted before COP. So with this, please back to you, Kun Virapon.
Thank you so much, Jens. So ขอบคุณทุกท่านมากเลยนะครับก็
So thank you everyone, all the panelists. I think we have some limited time today. So if you have any questions, please do drop them in drop your questions in the Q&A or the chat. So as the moderator today, I'd really like to thank all the speakers, Dr. Chaya Chantarawasu, Senior Vice President, Sustainability and Corporate Branding from PTTGC. And thank you, Kun Pirapong Chai, Executive Vice President of Corporate Engineering, CPF Thailand. And thank you, Dr. Bantoon Sarasirot, Energy Regulatory Commissioner. And lastly, Kun Jens Rachinsky, Regional Lead of UNFCCC. So that's the end of the panelist session from GCNT. So thank you for being here with us until now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kun Virapon, and to all the panel members for that informative discussion. Before we go to the closing remarks, I understand we have the results of the poll we did earlier. May I invite Ms. Kesaya Mbaba to show us the results?
Yes, and thank you to everybody who participated in the polls. It really shows a very interesting result. And certainly, I think that the thinking among the participants today is definitely in line with what we heard from the panelists as well. In the question about whether your organization has a net zero target, we see an overwhelming response for either yes, we have a net zero target, or not yet, but we plan to have one. So almost 40% of the respondents said that they already have a net zero target, and 43% said they plan to have one, whereas only 17% said that they don't have one outright. We also saw that in terms of a policy environment, I think that all of the options presented were of interest, but the highest ones that people see might make the best difference or most difference would be in relation to renewable energy, waste management, sustainable supply chains, and of course, water and other natural resources management. So some really interesting results there. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Yes, very interesting results indeed. Now, we have reached the last part of the webinar. I'd now like to invite Kun Thanyapon Krititayawut, Executive Director of the Global Compact Network Thailand, to deliver the closing remarks. ขอเรียนเชิญคุณธัญพรค่ะ
ค่ะขอบคุณนะคะแล้วก็ในฐานะผู้ร่วมจัดงานในวันนี้สมาคมเครือข่าย Global Compact แห่งประเทศไทยร่วมกับ So thank you very much. So on behalf of Global Compact Network Thailand and UN Resident Coordinator Office and UK Embassy Thailand, so I'd like to thank you everyone for taking part, participating, and being part of the organizing. So under the theme today, it's Build Forward Better, turning the climate crisis into business opportunities. So you can see that today we have heard the important policies to incentivize the private sector in Thailand to set or increase their ambitions and towards net zero. So in 2065, but I think our nearer goal is 2050 for us to be able to implement climate actions. So it's great to be here from the other private sectors on how can we uplift our business standards to the global standard. So I do hope that you have already heard the policy frameworks and what can actually drive your business and the stakeholders in your supply chain, so we could be able to achieve the low carbon and eventually the net zero carbon emission. So as you can see the examples, how can you take part in this? And to take part in our collective efforts, the GCNT is here to support this transition so we are moving towards the annual forum that's going to be organized on the 11th of October 2021. So we are here and we are well intended to support the business sector to bring in the innovation and knowledge to be able to implement the phase of the Paris Agreement and strive to be net zero and the resilience for your business to address this climate change. If you are interested to participate the activities of the Global Compact, so please, I'd like to invite you to become our members. We have a QR code. You can take your smartphones out now, so you can learn about the innovation that could be beneficial for your business. And if you are from the private sector, scan now and be a part of our community, the UN Global Compact, and become a part of creating a livable future for our next generation. So you can start from your business. Because if you're here in our platform, you'll be able to exchange knowledge and you can be a model business for your peers. So thank you very much for being here with us today. And I do hope that we can collaboratively work together and keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees. So you can see that even if the economy is growing, we can actually also take care of our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you all again, and we hope to see you on the 11th of October for the GCNT forum. Thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ